Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you'll give me a second here, if you're watching on the page, thanks. I'm going to show this over to the Facebook group so everybody in the group can enjoy this conversation that we're about to have. Give me 1 second, Internet. Do your thing. There we go. I'm going to share to my group. Share to, I want to share the group. And here we go, church communications. Here we go, perfect. Let's talk Snapchat. I'll type that out. Okay. So here we go. All right, folks, thanks for joining us. This is something that we've talked about a month ago when we had Justin posted a really great article about Snapchat and gave us an impassioned plea for why we probably shouldn't be using that platform, or at least why your kids should be on that platform, if nothing else. And with that came a whole, I would say, robust discussion. And so we decided, let's take that discussion and let's move it to a slightly different environment where we can actually kind of hash this out. So with us today, we have Mr. Justin Dean. You know him from that church conference, Sunday U. And then we've also got Mr. Neil Smith. You know him from the Social Media Church podcast, among other things. So these are, if you will, our two panelists in this discussion coming up from different viewpoints. So before we begin, let's talk a little bit, give the audience just a little bit of background here. Actually, first, let's do a little bit of background here. Snapchat, for those of you who don't know, is actually the number 3 social media network between 18 and 24-year-olds behind YouTube and Instagram. Snapchat at the same time has done some stuff that we would say probably not a good idea, i.e. they introduced a channel called Vogue After Dark that prominently featured porn and then removed it. However, they've got a long history of doing stuff like this, so this is not their first time of going into that and going into that area. However, they're not the only social media network that has its issues as well. So we want to acknowledge that as well. So anyway, guys, I want to say first and foremost, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this discussion. Let's open up with this. It looks like a presidential debate. Niels, can you give me your 2-minute elevator pitch? Why should a church even look at or think about using Snapchat?
Yeah, I think there's two core reasons. I mean, one, the Bible says go into all the world, and I feel like Snapchat. If we say that it's the third top social network that 18 and 24-year-olds are engaging on, there is a ministry opportunity from my perspective to engage 18 to 24-year-olds. I think it's also a demographic that I hear a lot of churches say we're struggling to figure out how do we reach this demographic, and so I feel like if you're going to ignore the platforms that they are heavily engaged on and then be frustrated that you're not reaching them, there's a disconnect there. So from my perspective, if there are people engaging in a space, we should look to engage them there. The other is, I would say Snapchat, from a creative perspective, is maybe the most creative social network out there. Instagram copied them because it was cool. There's a reason why teenagers are drawn to Instagram. Is what they're doing in augmented reality, what they're doing with new mobile technology is awesome, and it's cool. There is a dark side to it. There's no doubt about that. We'll talk about that. But I think there's a cool factor of Snapchat and a creative opportunity for those that use it effectively. So I think the creative side of it and just the fact of the mass engagement that's happening there with 18, 24-year-olds, there's a huge ministry opportunity sitting there.
Justin?
Well, so look, like Pew Research says that the 18 to 24-year-olds, the teenagers in particular, are on Snapchat, YouTube, and Instagram. So we can reach that same group on YouTube and Instagram as well. I mean, yeah, Instagram did copy Snapchat. Snapchat did lay a lot of this innovative groundwork, but we have Instagram now, and that same audience is there. So I totally agree. The Bible says to go out into the world, but there's many ways to go out into the world. And so because Snapchat is so bad and so risky, I think it's just not worth it to go there, or there needs to be severe boundaries and nuances around that of why a church should even use it or promote it when you have other opportunities to reach the same audience in very similar ways.
Yeah. So, okay. So you mentioned something, boundaries, severe boundaries. So let me ask you this. Do you see a way that a church, Justin, could use Snapchat? Do you see that even being viable? Or are you like, hey, I would just don't even go near it, ignore it?
Well, so let me put this around it. Like
Yeah.
when Snapchat first came out, my gut reaction was, man, churches should not use this. Like it just the founders are idiot frat boys. It was created literally to be able to sext back and forth. And I get it. Like Facebook had, similar but not quite as bad beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get that argument. But at first I was like, no, this is a hard no. It's just there's not enough reason for it. It was small at the time. Then it started gaining momentum. It was going crazy. It surpassed Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was using it. And I went on a podcast with Jay Cranda and Neil Smith on their podcast, and we debated this back then. This was a couple of years ago now. And honestly, I left that podcast saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, we do need to reach the world. This is where the kids are right now. At the time, it was the only place that they were. They were leaving Facebook and they were going to Snapchat. Instagram wasn't really a thing for this demographic yet, and Twitter wasn't even on the radar and was dying. So I kind of switched gears, and we put out, like, we did conference sessions, we did blog posts, we did a ton of content around, like, hey, churches, you're idiots if you don't get on Snapchat, right? So I was that guy, like, promoting it, creating content around it, saying this is great. But over time, like, Snapchat has just gotten worse and worse with the content that they're pushing and forcing on you, with not putting any kind of filters or restrictions around that. So I would say I'm coming back around to like a hard no. There's just no reason you should be on it.
Okay. All right. So, well, let me ask you this, Nils, when you look at this, you say, okay, hearing what Justin has to say in regards to that, and he does point to their history, and they do have a rocky history. So if I'm a church, I'm looking at them kind of going, this seems like it was born not out of good intention. It was kind of born out to be something that was used for nefarious means. If I'm a church looking at, so why would I invest in that if that was its, is it redeemable? Is the thrust of what I'm asking, and if so, how?
Are you asking me, Daryl?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm asking you. Sorry, Nils.
Yeah, so is it redeemable? I think that the reality is, I think almost everything is redeemable, if not everything is redeemable. And I think I think there's a number of layers to this. The struggle that I have with just even to go back to Justin's point a little bit is the hard no. Is to say that this is a platform we need to say a hard no to. I also think that when it comes to the other platforms of Instagram and YouTube, that they're that I don't think it's everyone is involved in all three of those. I think they're kind of choosing a little bit, especially Instagram or Snapchat. And so I think we can reach different groups. We're being engaged in different places. But I think absolutely it's redeemable. There is a dark side of Snapchat. I think we can all agree to that. Even some of the reasons as to why certain functions were created. But I think, just as even Justin shared earlier, if we are going to be on this platform, we have to create some hard boundaries. I agree that we need to create some hard boundaries, but I don't think that it's so hard that we should just totally ignore it. Now, even in my consulting role, I advise probably 98% of the ministries I work with, Snapchat is a waste of time for you. Snapchat is not a mass adoption, but if you are a youth pastor or a college pastor trying to reach 18 to 24-year-olds, I think it's something you should consider, and maybe very likely that you should be on. Now, if you aren't, you need high levels of accountability. You need clear understanding of how you're going to use the platform. But I don't think it's a hard no, and I do absolutely think it's redeemable. I think there are so many platforms. It just reminds me of like early days of the internet, where 20 years ago, churches would say, we shouldn't have a church website because if we do, we're encouraging people to use the internet. And if we're doing that, we're basically encouraging them to look at pornography, because 50% of the internet is pornography at that time. The internet has been redeemed and the way that people are using it. Right. And a lot of the reasons the internet was created was to do bad things, right? Yeah. And so I think Snapchat is much the same way. It's a platform that in many ways is agnostic. Maybe some of the intentions of why it was created are dark, but I think it's absolutely redeemable.
Yeah. So when you say, unpack the statement agnostic, because I'm curious what you mean by that. And let me kind of give you a little background on my question, why I'm asking that. Is that I think where I can see Justin's side of the argument is that if I was to look, if we all acknowledge that there's probably porn on Instagram, okay? There is in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. The difference is that Instagram's not curating the porn and then presenting it to me.
Neither is your website.
Yes, you're correct. But what I'm saying is like Snapchat and let's admit this is probably has to do with some of their business model. Their business model is a bit different from the other social media channels. Yes. Is that they're actively curating the content and working with the content providers to say, here's content for you. So when you say, in other words, is it fair to not look at them like just like they're like, we look at like YouTube. YouTube's a platform. Anybody can put content on it, but YouTube's not actively saying, I mean, I guess they are to a certain degree with their trending. They're not actively saying, this is the content we want you to watch. Whereas Snapchat is doing that.
Right. Like, yeah, that's the difference. You go to your church's website and you're not exposed to everything else that's on the internet. You can avoid that stuff. You can put blocks in place. Like, my kids can visit certain websites, but not others. Like that stuff, there's things that you can do to help that. And by saying go to ourchurch.com, you're not really exposing people to everything else that's on the internet. But by saying go follow us on Snapchat, they're literally having to avert their eyes from some pretty horrible stuff in order to see your content, even though your content might be great. And it's great that it's, a light in the darkness or whatever, but they're still, very hard to avoid that other stuff. Whereas YouTube and Instagram, you do have to search out that stuff. It's there. Like you can find porn on Instagram, you can find porn on YouTube, and they do have mechanisms in place to get rid of it, but not quick enough. And the world's view of porn is much different than, mine or probably any of ours. Like it's easy to find, a kid could easily find bikini pics or something, and Instagram would say, yeah, that's great. There's nothing wrong with this, stop flagging it. So, but Snapchat's different. Like they're actually pushing articles to you that have titles that say, don't share this with your parents, or, here's how to use a condom. It's not just graphic imaging, it's the messaging that we're pushing to them too. And by using it, we're saying that it's okay to see this, or we're saying, just please try not to look at that. Saying to a 14-year-old.
Yeah, I think, Justin, that's a great point. I think it's an important note for youth pastors to think about. Is maybe a big part of our role as ministry leaders is to coach people of how to set those. I mean, I think it is a big part of our role, safe boundaries around social media, and maybe it is a hard no. I think, though, to say that this is a black and white issue.
What boundaries can you put on Snapchat? Like, even as a youth pastor, like the messages disappear, everything's hidden. You can't filter, or like, unless someone's literally looking over your shoulder every time you use it, and we're having people do that to our kids, there's no way to have accountability on Snapchat.
I don't know Snapchat, the ins and outs of Snapchat, because I stopped using it a year ago when Instagram copied it, and there's so much more engagement there. And so the ins and outs of it, I don't know how you set up accountability, but Justin, it might be just that. It might be literally, if you're going to get on Snapchat, you say, I'm going to have somebody sitting next to me while I'm on Snapchat. If you're a youth pastor,
we can't say follow us on Snapchat. We're going to create engagement content for you there. But when you do, make sure that you have a buddy system for doing that.
But maybe that's not your strategy. Maybe your strategy is not to go and say, hey, everybody go follow us on Snapchat. Maybe it is to move them here. But I think the reality is there are a lot of teenagers and young adults engaging on Snapchat. So there is a ministry opportunity. Maybe it's not driving people there, but maybe it's taking people, engaging people there and moving them.
Certainly. I can go to a strip club and I can go talk to a stripper about the gospel, and she might even get saved. But then you wouldn't say, wow, we should all go to the strip club and share the gospel. No, I would say avoid the strip club at all costs.
Yeah, I think the strip club. I think the strip club analogy is probably a pretty good one. I will share this from a perspective. I think you guys talked about, if all of a sudden you're on this platform and you start promoting it to your people, are you there for promoting it to, like, hey, follow us on Snapchat, therefore, people are going to go. So you say I should be using Snapchat, and I'll give you an example of how that played out in my life. Is we signed up for Snapchat as a church. And so we were on Snapchat, and immediately within 10 minutes, we were snapping, if you will, to use that language. All of a sudden, like, I had these users follow us or friend us or however they phrase it on Snapchat. And I was like, I didn't know a single one of them. Didn't know them. So I took it to my wife, who's one of our student ministers, and said, do you recognize any of these usernames? She goes, they're all of our students. And they were not any of the other channels. They were following on this. I was like, I thought, great, fantastic. Then she followed up, my wife followed up with, is the church now using Snapchat? I said, yeah, is there a problem? She's like, yeah, because I actually tell our parents don't have kids use Snapchat. So you're contradicting what I'm telling the students. And it kind of hit me like, well, I'm kind of stuck because I did want to reach these kids, but I'm not sure how to do that in regards to that. So let's talk a little more practical and I know we're kind of getting there. So when we talk about this, Niels, how does that work? I mean, I know you said like, have accountability by, somebody's got to be with you when you use it, but are you worried from overall perspective by saying, yes, think of this like foreign missions, if you will. This is an area we've got to go to these people because they're over there. But how do you do that and say it with a straight face, knowing that what is out there? I mean, the strip club analogy is what Justin's using, but how does the church do that?
That there's not an easy answer to that. I think very creatively, very carefully. I think some of it though is it's clearly communicating. It's a missional opportunity, and I think it's communicating to our congregation of we're trying to reach people we could maybe never otherwise reach, and clearly communicating that we don't and want to encourage because of these reasons. We don't want to encourage our teenagers to get here, but we do want to reach those teenagers that are here. And so I can see, Snapchat ads are pretty underpriced. Literally, your whole Snapchat strategy could be we're just going to run ads and then try to drive them somewhere else. I think the core reality is that it's probably I think the points of the darkness on the platform are very real, and I think there's something we have to prioritize and communicate of understanding, and parents need to be educated. Parents that blindly let their teenagers get on Snapchat, that's a terrible thing. And so parents need to be educated of the darkness of Snapchat. I think then congregations need to be, if you do think there's a missional opportunity for your church, and I believe that there is huge missional opportunity for churches on Snapchat, but you've got to articulate why it is that you're engaging there. But it's not going to be a typical social media content strategy like you have on other platforms. And I think that's where people want to people almost basically see social media of, let's just run Facebook and then push that to Twitter, push that to Instagram, and push that to Pinterest. And that's not how social media works anymore. These are differentiated platforms. Snapchat, if you're going to use Snapchat, needs its own unique strategy for how that fits into your ministry context.
So if I can jump in before I forget this, because we're on the same page there. So I think you shouldn't be using Snapchat and saying following us on Snapchat and creating content and just using it like you would any other social platform. But if you want to run ads on Snapchat for your church or telling them, hey, what's better? Instagram, whatever. Like if a strip club allowed me as a church to advertise inside their strip club without having to go to their strip club, absolutely. That's a great opportunity. You can also put a billboard right outside the strip club. Lots of people actually do that. I think that's great. Like to have a strategy around like, hey, the kids are using Snapchat anyway. So let's find creative ways how the church can get in there without actually endorsing it or using it. I think that's great. Like kids are having sex anyway too. It doesn't mean that we should just give them condoms like the schools do. Instead, no, we should provide them some education on sex. We should have conversations around it. I think that this is the same way. Like if youth pastors want to reach teenagers and this demographic, it doesn't mean that we have to do whatever the teenagers do. Right. It might mean that you have, the guts, the boldness to stand up on your stage at youth group and say, you know what? I know everyone in this group has Snapchat, but that's a horrible place. Let me tell you why. Here's some biblical context around it. Here's why we don't promote it. You might see ads from us on there, but we don't use it, and neither should you. And you know what? We have a seminar on Wednesday night for parents that walks through why we have this stance. Like, take that boldness to actually teach those kids that, hey, just because everyone's using it doesn't mean that it's something that's appropriate. I think, for one, kids are going to respect that you have the boldness to actually teach them something worthwhile and that has some biblical context to it. You might lose a couple kids, but those are the kids that are probably smoking behind the church anyway, and you reach them in different ways. That's going to be a small portion of the kids.
Niels, can you give us some example of churches that you think are using Snapchat effectively for kingdom purposes? Like you said, like, hey, if you are on Snapchat, go check out Church X, whatever it is, because hey, they're killing it on the platform.
Yeah, there were a number of churches that holistically were using it very creatively. Honestly, before Instagram Stories came around, essentially they've shifted to Instagram Stories. The ones that I saw doing it well. I think the problem we're going to have, to go back to Justin's point a little bit, is that Instagram is just not nearly as cool as Snapchat. The Snapchat filters are cooler. The flexibility of what you can create on Snapchat, the way they're using AR technology. So it is almost just basically saying, I know you're on the cool platform that can do a lot of cool things. Go to a lot of what they're doing is they literally are creating content on Snapchat and then posting it on Instagram, and how they're using Snapchat is for their creative filters and things like that. So I think there is still a challenge of, Instagram needs to become cooler still to really compete with Snapchat, because it is a tension, because I can feel it with teenagers that are so creatively driven. There's one church that
was pretty cool, so I did that.
It's different. It's different. And because we're not talking about. I'm not talking about the content you're consuming. I'm talking about the content you're creating. And so, from a creative perspective,
content in a bed of filth, man.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I cannot argue with that. So there's one church in New Braunfels, Texas, that I've a friend of mine is a youth pastor at. And it's Community Bible Church New Braunfels. They were a church plant out of CBC, and they run a great Snapchat account. I don't even know the name of it, and they do takeovers. They're always getting. They had me one day just take it over in New York and just walk through and speak into these teenagers through Snapchat, engaging about 200 teenagers a day. Really high engagement, really great interrelational interaction. The way they literally all the time, best use I've seen of a youth group using Snapchat. Now that was probably 6 months ago. I spend so little time on Snapchat now because the engagement has decreased so much moving to Instagram. But that was probably the best youth group example I saw of a church using Snapchat.
Yeah, for us, I think next door Crosspoint Church was probably one of the better ones at it. They behind the scenes in the rehearsals, it was very. But you're right, like. Instagram is obviously stories where they move. I think one of the things when we talk about these networks, we tend to compare Instagram and Snapchat. And I think one of the things we need to note is I don't think, and I don't have hard evidence on this, but this is my conversations with users of both networks, is I don't think they use them the same way. In other words, when you talk to teenagers, they use Snapchat as a one-to-one messaging platform and Instagram as a one-to-many.
Yeah, because the messages disappear.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
on Instagram, they don't.
Exactly.
The stories disappear, but the messages don't.
Well, I think that's a misperception, though, of both of these platforms, is that the reason that they disappear is for dirty purposes. And I think teenagers are smart enough to know. Teenagers are dumb enough just to do a lot of dumb things, whether it disappears or not. I was 16 years old, and I'm just so grateful that Snapchat did not exist when I was 16 years old. But I think that the value of that is you pay more attention when it disappears. And that's why it was created, and that's why it works so well on Instagram.
I think it's a brilliant innovation, and that's why Snapchat copied it for stories. But don't be naive to think that kids are using Snapchat messaging and not the stories because it's cooler or has better, emojis or something. They're using it because it's private and it disappears. It's why they use all these other, Chinese-made apps that do the same thing. It's why they're not messaging on Instagram, even though the same functionality is there. It's because it doesn't disappear because their parents can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a philosophical problem with the idea that there's a technical issue with the idea that you think that you're going to put something online and it disappears, because we all know, technically speaking, that doesn't happen. It's on a server somewhere. The other problem is philosophically speaking, are you not teaching a student or a child or whatever? Live in the moment, do thing in the moment, and whatever you in the moment, it's going to pass through. And that's how you should live life, and not thinking, what's the consequence 10 minutes, 10 years, 10 months down the road. So I think there's also this philosophical thing that I've always, and that's by the way, that's been my issue with Snapchat from the get-go. Before the shady content started was
philosophical.
Yes, I don't know if that's something you want to do. Justin, if tomorrow Snapchat said, guess what, we're scrapping all of this, we're going to go to, we're just going to go with like ESP. We're going to go with some big big providers, and we're going to knock out all the shadiness. It's going to be much more PG at worst. Would you be like, yeah, get on the platform?
Yeah, I would certainly say let's give it a shot, right? Because I mean, Facebook and Instagram and all of these are much larger companies that have purposely put in a lot more privacy filters and stuff. But hey, like Zuckerberg's not a Christian. He's not a conservative by any means, even. Like, so I can't say like, oh, because the founders of Snapchat, the guys who run it are still idiots with bad intentions. It's like so are all these other companies. So is every service we use and product we buy. Like, so that's like, that argument's off the table. But if they were to say, hey, we hear you, where the platform's dying, we're going to reinvent it. Here's some parental features and things like that. Or if they match some of the features of Facebook, or if they made like the direct messaging so it doesn't disappear and can be archived. If they implemented features like that and had those intentions, I would say, yeah, if people are using this platform still, then certainly, yeah, let's try to use it as a way to reach people. But as it is now, and with the intentions that they have, and the stuff that they put out and the reasoning behind it, like, they are just no apologies for it. So I don't see that happening.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Again, I think that goes back to a little bit of the discussion of their business model. I don't think their business model is one in which they painted themselves in the corner with the way they've decided to generate revenue.
Well, and it's just that worldview too. Like, if you look at some of their biggest content providers, it's like Teen Vogue in the world. Like, Teen Vogue is in Cosmopolitan, they're legit magazines that you can find on the rack at Walmart and Target and whatnot. And kids are reading them, and it's no big deal. No one's looking at that as like porn or bad content if they're not a Christian. Right. But we're looking at that and going, no, I do not want my kids or anybody reading articles about how to have better sex and stuff like that. Like, the articles are insane. Or here's gifts to give your 14-year-old friend who just had an abortion. It's just crazy, the content they're putting out.
Interesting. Well, I think we've hashed this issue pretty good. I don't know if we can take it any further. I think
I won. I mean,
what's that?
I won.
Said so casually.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna be hearing about this for the next month on the internet.
Yeah, I think we should take a poll.
Yeah, I'll post a poll.
Fans vote doesn't count.
That's true.
I don't know what side he's on, honestly. Like, he was the one who pushed me to say, like, dude, churches need to be on Snapchat. We should push this, but I don't know where he stands.
He gave us the angry emoji on the
but he also gave a laughing one. I don't know those.
I don't know what's going on there.
We'll just say he voted for me, and we'll
call it a day. Guys, everybody watching, I hope you take this advice. I hope you really think about it. Of course, I think you should think about any platform you sign up for. Take a hard look at it. One thing that we didn't say that I think is that when you're thinking about platforms and you think about your content, and I think Justin's hitting on this, is not only think about what you're doing for your church, but what are you doing for those families out there? A lot of times when you encourage certain content and certain platforms, understand that parent has got to explain that to that kid in the pew, why the church is using X, Y, and Z, and why they can't, whatever that is. And Snapchat definitely, I think, falls in that category. And as somebody who is, again, I'm married to a student minister, so I kind of have to deal with that with them. So, but guys, thank you.
Can I just say one last thing too?
Go ahead.
Like, this totally falls on parents. This is parents' fault, but the Van says I'm out in the comments, so that's good. But I think parents are lazy. So if a church is creating content on Snapchat and they got slides up pre-post saying, follow us on Snapchat, and their kid comes home from youth group saying, hey, Pastor Dan's on Snapchat, so I can use it. Most parents, the majority of parents, are going to say, well, if the church is promoting it and they're using it, then it must be okay. So I don't need to watch this as closely. And I think that that's a horrible way to parent. So shame on anybody who does that. Like, you should be involved and check things out no matter what. But I think that like, the church has a lot of weight with things like this. And so I don't think we should just naively, go to it and use it just because everyone's using it. I think you really, really need to have a specific strategy and reason behind it. And then you should go a step further if you're against it, to say, hey, let's educate our parents on how to be better parents. Like that should be something the youth group is providing.
You heard it here first, folks. If your kids are on Snapchat, you're a horrible parent.
And if I could say one last thing too, I love Justin Dean, and you go to that church conference. He's awesome.
Yes. Use the code Snapchat for $50 off.
Oh, fantastic! You heard? Oh, great.
I will set that up. But Nils, I love you too. Daryl, I love you too. I think we're all really good friends, and I feel like we're definitely somewhat on the same page with this. But I take hard stances on things because I just think there's no other way to live. But
that's it.
Well, that's going to your tombstone. All right. Anyway, thank you guys so much for this conversation, guys. You can check out Neil Smith. You can catch him on the church social media podcast. Obviously, Justin, you can catch him over at Sunday U, and of course that church conference as well. Don't forget to sign up for that and use the code Snapchat. Get $50 off. So anyway, guys, thanks for doing this. Guys, hope you enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments section, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Let me find the end broadcast button. Where we got?